The Belgian Twins by Lucy Fitch Perkins. Chapter 6. At the Church. Several days passed quietly by in the little village of Meer. The sun shone and the wind blew, and the rains fell upon the peaceful fields, just as if nothing whatever had happened. Each day was filled to the brim with hard work. With the help of the twins, Mother Van Hove kept the garden free of weeds and took care of the stock. She even threshed the wheat herself with her husband's flail, and stored the grain away in sacks ready for the mill. Each evening, when the work was done, the three went down the village street together. One evening, just at dusk, they found nearly the whole village gathered in front of the priest's house next to the church. Léon, the burgomeester's oldest boy, had been to Malines that day and had brought back a paper. The priest was reading from it to the anxious group gathered about him. "Oh, my children," he was saying, as Mother Van Hove and the twins joined the group, "there is no doubt need for courage. But where is there a Belgian lacking in that? Even Julius Caesar, 2000 years ago, found that out. The bravest of all are the Belgians, he said then, and it is none the less true to-day. The Germans have crossed our eastern frontier. It is reported that they are already burning towns and killing the inhabitants if they resist. God knows what may befall us. Our good King Albert has asked Parliament to refuse the demands of the Germans. In spite of their solemn treaty with us, they demand that we permit them to cross Belgium to attack France. To this our brave King and Parliament will never consent. No true Belgian would wish them to. There is, then, this choice, either to submit absolutely to the invasion of our country, or to defend it. The army is already in the field." There was a moment of heavy silence as he finished speaking. Then the voice of the burgomeester's wife was heard in the stillness. "Oh, Mynheer Pastoor," she said to the priest, "what shall we do? There is no place to go to. We have no refuge." "God is our refuge and strength, my children," said the priest, lifting his eyes to heaven. "We have no other. You must stay here, and if the terrible Germans come, hide yourselves away as best you can until they have passed by. Do not anger them by resisting. Bow your heads to the storm, and have faith in God that it may soon pass over." He turned and led the way toward the little church as he spoke. "Come," he said, "let us pray before God's holy altar, and if the enemy comes, seek refuge in the church itself. Surely even the Germans will respect the sanctuary." Solemnly the people filed into the little church, lighted only by the candles on the altar, and knelt upon the hard floor. The priest left them there, praying silently, while he went to put on the robes of his offices. Then once more he appeared before the altar, and led the kneeling congregation in the litany. "From war and pestilence and sudden death, good Lord, deliver us," he prayed at last, and all the people responded with a fervent Amen. That night, when she put her children to bed, Mother Van Hove fastened a chain with a locket upon it about Marie's neck. "Listen, Mamie," she said, "and you too, my little Jan. God only knows what may be before us. This locket contains my picture. You must wear it always about your neck, and remember that your mother's name is Leonie Van Hove, and your father's name is George Van Hove. If by any chance, which God forbid, we should become separated from one another, keep the locket on your neck, and our names in your memory until we meet again. For if such a thing should happen, do not doubt that I should find you, though I had to swim the sea to do it. For you, my Jan, I have no locket, but you are a man, a brave man now. You must take care of yourself and your sister too, if need should arise, and above all, remember this, Only the brave are safe. Whatever happens, you must remember that you are Belgians, and be brave." The children clung to her, weeping, as she finished. "There, there," she said soothingly. "I had to tell you this, so you would be ready to do your best and not despair, whatever might happen. But be sure, my lambs, nothing shall harm you if I can help it, and nothing shall separate us from one another if God so wills. Now go to sleep." She kissed them tenderly, and quite comforted, they nestled down in their beds and soon were asleep. She herself slept but little that night. Long after the children were quiet, she sat alone on the kitchen step in the darkness, with Fidel by her side, and listened to the faint sound of distant guns, and watched the red lights in the sky, which told her of the burning of Louvain. Chapter 6.
By Lucy Fitzperkins. Chapter 7. The Tidal Wave of Germans. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Mother Van Hove and the twins went about their work as usual. The sunshine was so bright, and the whole countryside looked so peaceful and fair, it was impossible to believe that the terrors of the night could be true. "Today we must begin to gather the potatoes," said Mother Van Hove after breakfast. "Jan, you get the fork and hoe and put them in the wagon, while I milk the cow, and Marie puts up some bread and cheese for us to take to the field." She started across the road to the pasture, with Fidel at her heels, as she spoke. In an instant she was back again, her eyes wide with horror. "Look! Look!" she cried. The dazed children looked toward the east as she pointed. There, in the distance, advancing like a great tidal wave, was a long gray line of soldiers on horseback. Already they could hear the sound of music and the throb of drums. Already the sun glistened upon the shining helmets and the cruel points of bayonets. The host stretched away across the plain as far as the eye could reach, and behind them the sky was thick with the smoke of fires. "The church! The church!" cried Mother Van Hove. "No, there is no time. Hide in here, my darlings. Quickly, quickly!" She tore open the door of the earth-covered vegetable cellar as she spoke, and thrust Jan and Marie inside. Fidel bolted in after them. "Do not move or make a sound until all is quiet again," she cried as she closed the door. There was not room for her too in the cellar, and if there had been, Mother Van Hove would not have taken it, for it was necessary to close the door from the outside. This she did, hastily, throwing some straw before it. Then she rushed into the house and, snatching up her shining milk pans, flung them onto the straw as if they were placed there to be sweetened by the sun. No one would think to look under a pile of pans for hidden Belgians, she felt sure. Nearer and nearer came the hosts, and now she could hear the sound of singing as from 10,000 brazen throats. "Deutschland, Deutschland, über alles," roared the mighty chorus, and in another moment the little village of Meer was submerged in the terrible gray flood. At last, after what seemed to the imprisoned children like a year of darkness and dread, and of strange terrifying noises of all kinds, the sound of horses' hoofs and marching feet died away in the distance, and Jan ventured to push open the door of the cavern a crack, just intending to peep out. Immediately there was a crash of falling tinware. Jan quickly drew back again into the safe darkness and waited. As nothing further happened, he peeped out again. This time Fidel, springing forward, flung the doors wide open and dashed out into the sunshine with a joyous bark. In a moment more Jan and Marie also crawled out of their hiding place after him. For an instant, as they came out into the daylight, it seemed to the children as if they had awakened from a dreadful dream. There stood the farmhouse just as before, with the kitchen door wide open and the sun streaming in upon the sanded floor. There were only the marks of many feet in the soft earth of the farmyard, an empty pig pen, and a few chicken feathers blowing about the hen house to show where the invaders had been and what they had carried away with them. Jan and Marie, followed by Fidel, ran to the house. From the front door, which opened on the road, they could see the long gray line sweeping across the fields toward Malines. "The storm has passed," cried Marie, sobbing with grief, "just as Meneer Pastoor said it would. Mother, Mother, where are you?" They ran from kitchen to bedroom and back again, their terror increasing at every step, as no voice answered their call. They searched the cellar and the loft. They looked in the stable and barn, and even in the dog house. Their mother was nowhere to be found. "I know where she must be," cried Jan at last. "You know Meneer Pastoor said if anything happened we would hide in the church." Led by this hope, the two children sped hand in hand toward the village. "Belle is gone," gasped Jan, as they passed the pasture bars. "Pier too," sobbed Marie. Down the whole length of the deserted village street they flew, with Fidel following close at their heels. When they came to the little church, they burst open the door and looked in. The cheerful sun streamed through the windows, falling in brilliant patches of light upon the floor, but the church was silent and empty. It was some time before they could realize that there was not a human being but themselves in the entire village. All the others had been driven away like sheep before the invading army. When at last the terrible truth dawned upon them, the two frightened children sat down upon the church steps in the silence and clung, weeping, to each other. Fidel whined and licked their hands, as though he, too, understood and felt their loneliness. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" moaned Marie. "There's nobody to tell us what to do," sobbed Jan. "We must just do the best we can by ourselves." "We can't stay here alone," said Marie. "But where can we go?" cried Jan. "There's no place for us to go." For a few minutes the two children wept their hearts out in utter despair, but hope always comes when it's most needed, and soon Marie raised her head and wiped her eyes. "Don't you remember what Mother said when she put the locket on my neck, Jan?" she asked. "She said that she would find us, even if she had to swim the sea. She said no matter what happened we should never despair. And here we are, despairing as hard as ever we can." Jan threw up his chin and straightened his back. "Yes," he said, swallowing his sobs, "and she said I was now a man and must take care of myself and you." "What shall we do then?" asked Marie. Jan thought hard for a moment. Then he said, "Eat. It must be late, and we have not had a mouthful today." Marie stood up. "Yes," said she, "we must eat. Let us go back home." The clock in the steeple struck 11 as the two children ran once more through the deserted street and began a search for food in their empty house. They found that the invaders had been as thorough within the house as without. Not only had they carried away the grain which their mother had worked so hard to thresh, but they had cleaned the cupboard as well. The hungry children found nothing but a few crusts of bread, a bit of cheese, and some milk in the cellar. But with these and 2 eggs, which Jan knew where to look for in the straw in the barn, they made an excellent breakfast. They gave Fidel the last of the milk, and then, much refreshed, made ready to start upon a strange and lonely journey, the end of which they did not know. They tied their best clothes in a bundle, which Jan hung upon a stick over his shoulder, and were just about to leave the house when Marie cried out, "Suppose Mother would come back and find us gone!" "We must leave word where we have gone, so she will know where to look for us, of course," Jan answered capably. "Yes, but how?" persisted Marie. "There's no one to leave word with." This was a hard puzzle, but Jan soon found a way out. "We must write a note and pin it up where she would be sure to find it," he said. "The very thing," said Marie. They found a bit of charcoal and a piece of wrapping paper, and Jan was all ready to write when a new difficulty presented itself. "What shall I say?" he said to Marie. "We don't know where we are going." "We don't know the way to any place but Malines," said Marie, "so we'll have to go there, I suppose." "How do you spell Malines?" asked Jan, charcoal in hand. "Oh, you stupid boy!" cried Marie. "Malines, of course." Jan put the paper down on the kitchen floor and got down before it on his hands and knees. He had not yet learned to write, but he managed to print upon it in great staggering letters: "Dear Mother, we have gone to Malines to find you. Jan and Marie." This note they pinned up on the inside of the kitchen door. "Now we are ready to start," said Jan, and calling Fidel, the two children set forth. They took a short cut from the house across the pasture to the potato field. Here they dug a few potatoes, which they put in their bundle, and then, avoiding the road, slipped down to the river and, following the stream, made their way toward Malines. It was fortunate for them that, screened by the bushes and trees which fringed the bank of the river, they saw but little of the ruin and devastation left in the wake of the German hosts. There were farmers who had tried to defend their families and homes from the invaders. Burning houses and barns marked the places where they had lived and died. But the children, thinking only of their lost mother and of keeping themselves as much out of sight as possible in their search for her, were spared most of these horrors. Their progress was slow, for the bundle was heavy and the river path less direct than the road, and it was nightfall before the two little waifs, with Fidel at their heels, reached the well-remembered Brussels gate. Their hearts almost stopped beating when they found it guarded by a German soldier. "Who goes there?" demanded the guard gruffly, as he caught sight of the little figures. "If you please, sir, it's Jan and Marie," said Jan, shaking in his boots. "And Fidel, too," said Marie. The soldier bent down and looked closely at the two tear-stained little faces. It may be that some remembrance of other little faces stirred within him, for he only said stiffly, "Pass, Jan and Marie, and you too, Fidel." And the two children and the dog hurried through the gate and up the first street they came to, their bundle bumping along behind them as they ran. The city seemed strangely silent and deserted, except for the gray-clad soldiers, and armed guards blocked the ways at intervals. Taught by fear, Jan and Marie soon learned to slip quietly along under cover of the gathering darkness, and to dodge into a doorway around a corner when they came too near one of the stiff, helmeted figures. At last, after an hour of aimless wandering, they found themselves in a large open square, looking up at the tall cathedral spires. A German soldier came suddenly out of the shadows, and the frightened children, scarcely knowing what they did, ran up the cathedral steps and flung themselves against the door. When the soldier had passed by, they reached cautiously up, and by dint of pulling with their united strength succeeded at last in getting the door open. They thrust their bundle inside, pushed Fidel in after it, and then slipped through themselves. The great door closed behind them on silent hinges, and they were alone in the vast stillness of the cathedral. Timidly they crept toward the lights of the altar, and, utterly exhausted, slept that night on the floor near the statue of the Madonna, with their heads pillowed on Fidel's shaggy side. End of chapter 7. Recording by Kattekliek. And the eels. When the cathedral bells rang the next morning for early mass, the children were still sleeping the sleep of utter exhaustion. It was not until the bells had ceased to ring and the door opening from the sacristy near their resting place creaked upon its hinges that even Fidel was aroused. True to his watchdog instincts, he started to his feet with a low growl, letting the heads of Jan and Marie down upon the floor with a sudden bump. For an instant the awakened children could not remember where they were or what had happened to them. They sat up and rubbed their heads, but the habit of fear was already so strong upon them that they made no sound, and instantly quieted Fidel. Again the door creaked, and through it there appeared a tall figure dressed in priestly robes. The children were so near that had they thrust their hands through the railing of the communion bank behind which they were concealed, they might have touched him as he passed before the altar of the Virgin and presented himself in front of the high altar to conduct the Mass. His head, as he passed them, was bowed. His face was pale and thin and marked with lines of deep sorrow. "Oh," whispered Marie to Jan, "it must be the Cardinal himself. Mother told me about him." The whisper made such a loud sound in the silence of the great cathedral aisles that Jan was afraid to reply. For answer he only laid his finger upon his lips and crept still farther back into the shadow. Fidel seemed to know that dogs were not allowed in church, and that it was necessary for him to be quiet too, for he crawled back with the children into the sheltering darkness. There were only a few persons in the cathedral, and those few were near the door, so no one saw the children as they knelt with folded hands and bowed heads in their corner, reverently following the service as the Cardinal ate the sacred wafer and drank the communion wine before the altar. Later they were to know his face as the bravest and best beloved in all Belgium, next to those of the King and Queen themselves. When again he passed the kneeling little figures on his return to the sacristy, their lonely hearts so ached for care and protection, and his face looked so kind and pitiful, that they almost dared to make their presence known and to ask for the help they sorely needed. Marie, bolder than Jan, half rose as he passed, but Jan pulled her back, and in another instant the door had closed behind him and he was gone. "Oh," sobbed Marie under her breath, "he looked so kind. He might have helped us. Why did you pull me back?" "How could we let him see Fidel and tell him that our dog had slept all night before the altar?" answered Jan. "I shouldn't dare. He is a great prince of the church." The sound of scraping chairs told them that the little congregation had risen from its knees and was passing out of the church. They waited until every one had disappeared through the great door, and then made a swift flight down the echoing aisle and out into the sunlight. For a moment they stood hand in hand upon the cathedral steps, clasping their bundle and waiting for the next turn of fortune's wheel. The bright sunlight of the summer day, shining on the open square, almost blinded them, and what they saw in the square, when their eyes had become used to it, did not comfort them. Everywhere there were German soldiers with their terrible bayonets and pointed helmets and their terrible songs. Everywhere there were pale and desperate Belgians fleeing before the arrogant German invader. "Oh, Jan," whispered Marie, clinging to him, "there are so many people. How shall we ever find Mother? I didn't know there were so many people in the whole world." "It isn't likely that we'll find her by just standing here, anyway," answered Jan. "We've got to keep going till we get somewhere." He slung the bundle on his shoulder and whistled to Fidel, who had gone down the steps to bark at a homeless cat. "Come along," he said to Marie, and once more the little pilgrims took up their journey. At the first corner they paused, not knowing whether to go to the right or to the left. "Which way?" said Marie. Jan stood still and looked first in one direction and then in the other. "Here, gutter snipes, what are you standing here for? Make way for your betters!" said a gruff voice behind them, and turning, the children found themselves face to face with a German officer dressed in a resplendent uniform and accompanied by a group of swaggering young soldiers. Too frightened to move, the children only looked up at him and did not stir. "Get out of the way, I tell you!" roared the officer, turning purple with rage. "Orderly!" One of the young men sprang forward. He seized Jan by the arm and deftly kicked him into the gutter. Another at the same moment laid his hands on Marie. But he reckoned without Fidel, faithful Fidel, who knew no difference between German and Belgian, but knew only that no cruel hand should touch his beloved Marie. while he was there to defend her. With a fierce growl he sprang at the young orderly and buried his teeth in his leg. Howling with pain, the orderly dropped Marie, while another soldier drew his sword with an oath and made a thrust at Fidel. Fortunately Fidel was too quick for him. He let go his hold upon the leg of the orderly, tearing a large hole in his uniform as he did so, and flung himself directly between the legs of the other soldier, who was lunging at him with the sword. The next instant the surprised German found himself sprawling upon the sidewalk, and saw Fidel, who had escaped without a scratch, dashing wildly up the street after Jan and Marie. Beside himself with rage, the soldier drew a revolver and fired a shot, which barely missed Fidel, and buried itself in the doorstep of the house past which he was running. If Jan and Marie had not turned a corner just at that moment, and if Fidel had not followed them, there is no telling what might have happened next, for the young soldier was very angry indeed. Perhaps he considered it beneath his dignity to run after them, and perhaps he saw that Jan and Marie could both run like the wind, and he would not be likely to catch them if he did. At any rate, he did not follow. He picked himself up and dusted his clothes, using very bad language as he did so, and followed the officer and his companions up the street. Meanwhile, the tired children ran on and on, fear lending speed to their weary legs. Round behind the great cathedral they sped, hoping to find some way of escape from the terrors of the town, but their way was blocked by the smoking ruins of a section of the city which the Germans had burned in the night, and there was no way to get out in that direction. Terrified and faint with hunger, they turned once more, and not knowing where they were going, stumbled at last upon the street which led to the Antwerp gate. "I remember this place," cried Jan, with something like joy in his voice. "Don't you remember, Marie? It's where we stood to watch the soldiers, and Mother sang for us to march because we were so tired and hungry." "I'm tired and hungry now, too," said poor Marie. "Let's march again," said Jan. "Where to?" said Marie. "That's the way Father went when he marched away with the soldiers," said Jan, pointing to the Antwerp gate. "Anything is better than staying here. Let's go that way." He started bravely forward once more, Marie and Fidel following. They found themselves only two wretched atoms in one of the saddest processions in history, for there were many other people, as unhappy as themselves, who were also trying to escape from the city. Some had lived in the section which was now burning, others had been turned out of their homes by the Germans, and all were hastening along, carrying babies and bundles, and followed by groups of older children. Jan and Marie were swept along with the hurrying crowd, through the city gate and beyond, along the river road which led to Antwerp. No one spoke to them. Doubtless they were supposed to belong to some of the fleeing families, and it was at least comforting to the children to be near people of whom they were not afraid. But Jan and Marie could not keep pace with the swift-moving crowd of refugees. They trudged along the highway at their best speed, only to find themselves straggling farther and farther behind. They were half a mile or more beyond the city gate when they overtook a queer little old woman who was plodding steadily along wheeling a wheelbarrow in front of her. She evidently did not belong among the refugees, for she was making no effort to keep up with them. She had bright, twinkling black eyes and snow-white hair tucked under a snow-white cap. Her face was as brown as a nut and full of wrinkles, but it shone with such kindness and goodwill that when Jan and Marie had taken one look at her, they could not help walking along by her side. "Maybe she has seen Mother," whispered Marie to Jan. "Let's ask her." The little old woman smiled down at them as they joined her. "You'll have to hurry, my dears, or you won't keep up with your folks," she said kindly. "They aren't our folks," said Jan. "They aren't?" said the little old woman, stopping short. "Then where are your folks?" "We haven't any, not just now," said Jan. "You see, our father is a soldier, and our mother, oh, have you seen our mother? She's lost." The little old woman gave them a quick, pitying glance. "Lost, is she?" she said. "Well now, I can't just be sure whether I've seen her or not knowing what she looks like. But I wouldn't say I haven't. Lots of folks have passed this way. How did she get lost?" She sat down on the edge of the barrow and drew the children to her side. "Come now," she said, "tell Granny all about it. I've seen more trouble than any one of you ever saw in all your life before, and I'm not a mite afraid of it either." Comforted already, the children poured forth their story. "You poor little lambs!" she cried when they had finished. "And you haven't had a bite to eat since yesterday! Mercy on us! You can never find your mother on an empty stomach." She rose from the wheelbarrow as she spoke, and trundled it swiftly from the road to the bank of the river, a short distance away. Here, in a sheltered nook, hidden from the highway by a group of willows, she stopped. "We'll camp right here, and I'll get you a dinner fit for a king or a duke at the very least," she said cheerily. "Look what I have in my wheelbarrow." She took a basket from the top of it as she spoke. Fidel was already looking in, with his tail standing straight out behind, his ears pointed forward, and the hairs bristling on the back of his neck. There, on some clean white sand in the bottom of the wheelbarrow, wriggled a fine fat eel. "Now I know why I didn't sell that eel!" cried Granny. "There's always a reason for everything, you see, my darlings." She seized the eel with a firm, well sanded hand as she spoke, and before could spell your name backwards, she had skinned and dressed it, and had given the remnants to poor, hungry Fidel. "Now, my boy," she said gaily to Jan as she worked, "you get together some twigs and dead leaves, and you, Big Eyes," she added to Marie, "find some stones by the river, and we'll soon have such a stove as you never saw before, and a fire in it, and a bit of fried eel to fill your hungry stomachs." Immensely cheered, the children flew on these errands. Then Marie had a bright thought. "We have some potatoes in our bundle," she said. "Well now!" cried a little old woman. "Wouldn't you think they had just followed up that eel on purpose? We'll put them to roast in the ashes. I always carry a pan and a bit of fat and some matches about with me when I take my eels to market," she explained as she whisked these things out of the basket. "And it often happens that I cook myself a bite to eat on my way home, especially if I'm late. You see, I live a long way from here, just across the river from Boom, and I'm getting lazy in my old age. Early every morning I walk to Malines with my barrow full of fine eels and sell them to the people of the town. That's how I happen to be so rich." "Are you rich?" asked Marie wonderingly. She had brought the stones from the river, and now she untied her bundle and took out the potatoes. Jan had already heaped a little mound of sticks and twigs near by, and soon the potatoes were cooking in the ashes, and the most appetizing smell of frying eel filled the air. "Am I rich?" repeated the old woman. She looked surprised that anyone could ask such a question. "Of course I'm rich. Haven't I got 2 eyes in my head? And a tongue, too? And it's lucky indeed that it's that way about, for if I had but 1 eye and 2 tongues, you see for yourself how much less handy that would be. And I've 2 legs, as good as anyone's, and 2 hands to help myself with. The Kaiser himself has no more legs and arms than I, and I doubt if he can use them half as well. Neither has he a stomach the more. And as for his heart," she looked cautiously around as she spoke, "his heart, I'll be bound, is not half so good as mine. If it were, he could not find it in it to do all the cruel things he's doing here, I'm sure of that." For a moment the cheerfulness of her face clouded over, but she saw the shadow reflected in the faces of Jan and Marie, and at once spoke more gaily. "Bless you, yes, I'm rich," she went on, "and so are you. You've got all the things that I have and more too. For your legs and arms are young, and you have a mother to look for. Not everyone has that, you may depend. And one of these days you'll find her, Make no doubt of that." "If we don't, she'll surely find us anyway," said Jan. "She said she would." "Indeed and she will," said the old woman. "Even the Germans couldn't stop her, so what matter is it if you both have to look a bit first? It will only make it the better when you find each other again." When the potatoes were done, the little old woman raked them out of the ashes with a stick, broke them open, sprinkled a bit of salt on them from the wonderful basket, and then handed one to each of the children, wrapped in a plantain leaf so they should not burn their fingers. A piece of the eel was served to them in the same way, and Granny beamed with satisfaction as she watched her famished guests. "Aren't you going to eat too?" asked Marie, with her mouth full. "Bless you, yes," said Granny. "Every chance I get. You just watch me." She made a great show of taking a piece of the eel as she spoke, but if any one had been watching carefully, they would have her slyly put it back again into the pan, and the children never knew that they ate her share and their own too. When they had eaten every scrap of the eel, and Fidel had finished the bones, the little old woman rose briskly from the bank, washed her pan in the river, packed it in her basket again, and led the way up the path to the highway once more. Although they found the road still filled with the flying refugees, the world had grown suddenly brighter to Jan and Marie. They had found a friend, and they were fed. "Now you come along home with your Granny," said the little old woman as they reached the Antwerp road and turned northward. "For I live in a little house by the river, right on the way to wherever you want to go." End of chapter 8. Recording by Kattekliek.